All right, Matthew chapter 5. We're continuing a series in the Beatitude. If you're just joining us this morning through this series, the Beatitude, it's a common term for the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount begins in Matthew chapter 5. It goes through Matthew chapter 7. It's called the Sermon on the Mount because Jesus was on a high place on a mountain when he began teaching both his disciples and the crowds that had gathered. And so it's called the Sermon on the Mount. It's basically a compilation of a variety of things that Jesus taught his disciples and the crowds that had gathered. But it begins with a refrain, blessed. Blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. And there are 8 blessings. There are 8 characteristics that Jesus describes as the blessed kind of life or the blessed people. And it begins in verse 3 of Matthew chapter 5 where Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit. In verse 4 he says, blessed are those who mourn. In verse 5, blessed are the meek. In verse 6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And then in verse 7, where we're going to be today, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Now the word beatitude, these are called the Beatitudes. There's 8 of them. It comes from a Latin word, beatus, which we translate blessed, but that's where the word beatitude comes from. And as I shared in the very first week of this series, is that this is the happy life. I think that that's an appropriate way to translate that word is happy. Happy are. And we talked about, going way back to the beginning of this series, that we're all in search for happiness. Everybody. There's not a single person that I've ever met that says, I want to be miserable. Even people that love their misery think that, misery loves company, that even in their misery, they find some sort of happiness. They love to be miserable. Everybody, but nobody I just want to be miserable. Everybody wants to be happy. And here, Jesus is defining for us what the good life or the happy life or the blessed life is. And it's upside down from the world, because of the things that he describes, the poor in spirit, those who mourn, those who are meek. And he begins, there's a negative focus in verse 3, 4, and 5. The poor in spirit, those who mourn or grieve over their own sin and the sin that impacts them in the world. And those who are then bowed down. They're prostrate before the Lord, the meek. Those who, as I talked about several weeks ago, that have nothing to defend. They're not trying to defend themselves, and they're not trying to declare themselves. They're not putting themselves out as the center of attention. They are meek. And then last week we talked about those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, that there begins in verse 6 to be a turn. So the first 3 of those Beatitudes is, I've got nothing, and I grieve that. I mourn what is missing in me, or what is in me that I don't want to be in me, i.e. my sin. And then I am low before the Lord and before others. I just read this week a definition of meekness is that my enemies who speak ill of me don't know the half of it. They would say a lot worse if they really knew me the way that I know me, and that's meekness. And then last week, so that person then seeing all those things, I've got nothing, I grieve that, and I'm low before God and before others, then is hungering. Each one of these Beatitudes builds one upon the other. So it starts in the very first place of poverty of spirit, that I'm bankrupt before God and before other people. I've got nothing. And then it builds to where I'm hungering and thirsting for what I'm not, for righteousness, for what I want to be. And now we start to see the positive. All right, so verse 6 was kind of a turn, and now here in verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. That's what's in front of us today. And there's a lot of questions that I believe come from this one verse. There's much to be said here, and I pray for us this morning as we walk away from this, there would be a simple and humble prayer in each one of us that we would be merciful as we cry out to God for mercy. All right, so that's where we're at this morning. Now, I want to share with you a story that began for two gentlemen in 1943. Here are the two guys. On the right is a guy named Charles Brown, and he was from West Virginia. He was a good old boy, a country guy from Appalachia, from the hills of West Virginia. And to his left is a guy named Franz Stigler. They were both pilots. And on December the 20th, 1943, they met each other for the first time. And here's how it happened, is that Charles Brown piloted a B-17 bomber for America in World War II. And he had just run a bombing mission over Germany when he was met by 15 German fighter pilots. And as he was on his way out of Germany, trying to get back to England, his B-17 got shot up. And if you've ever seen a B-17 bomber, here's what they look like. These were the flying fortresses. There was a tail gunner, there was a top gunner here, and then the pilots would have been there. So he meets 15 German fighter pilots, and they shoot his plane to smithereens. His tail gunner gets killed. Several other guys got wounded. The tail got shot off. Part of the front got shot off. And he was trying to hold the plane together. In fact, Charles Brown, who was the pilot, he was 21 years old. And he had been knocked out at one point in the battle with these German fighters, and had actually had been revived as the plane was in a nosedive. And he awoke in time to pull the plane back up and then to try to beeline out of Germany. The German fighter pilots had basically called off the dogs. They had gone away because they left him for dead. They figured that the plane, as they saw it in a dive, they were goners anyway. And so they went on to their other tasks in front of them. Charles, again, was revived. He pulled the plane up, and now he's trying to get out of Germany. And at the point that he and Franz Stigler meet each other is that he was flying low, having just pulled the plane up over, let me see the name of the town. The name of the town that he was flying over was Oldenburg, Germany. And there was a German Air Force base there, and Franz Stigler was smoking a cigarette after his plane was being refueled when he sees this American B-17 bomber fly right overhead. In fact, they expected bombs to drop out. Nothing happened, and the plane, flying very low, crosses over Oldenburg, Germany, and continues on. So immediately, Franz Stigler throws his cigarette down, looks at the guys startled and in shock around him. They detach the fueling hoses from his plane, and he jumps in. Now, he had 23 confirmed kills at that point. He was 26 years old and had just been commissioned a year before in Hitler's Air Force. And so he jumps in his plane, and he takes off to give chase to get to this B-17 bomber and shoot it down. So you can imagine then when Charles Brown pulls up and he's trying to keep his plane in the air, he's trying to get into England from Germany, and he's starting to take an assessment of everything that's happening in his plane. The wounded crew were being taken care of by those who weren't. Everybody was in a panic. No one thought that they were going to live, and everybody was holding their breath to see if they could get out of Germany. And at one point, Charles' co-pilot is looking at him, and then he sees Charles' face go even more white than what it already was, because Charles was looking past him, and he sees out of the right, just a few feet away, a German fighter pilot, Franz Stigler. He had come up on Charles Brown and the plane and had been behind them, and he was getting ready. He had them in his sights. They were making no kinds of maneuvers, and he was getting ready to pull the trigger and shoot them down when he looks. And he sees that there's no action in the tail from the tail gunner. You know, these planes were massive, and it was the tail gunner's responsibility to fight off anybody that was approaching. And there was no motion, there was no activity. And Franz Stigler, as shocked as he was, looks and he realizes that the tail gunner's dead. He sees that he's slumped over the guns, and he can actually see blood that's starting to freeze and hang like icicles off of the turret. And so he flies up beside the plane to assess what's happening, and that's when Charles Brown looks over and he sees him eyeball to eyeball right beside him. When Jesus says that those who are merciful will receive mercy, there's something very specific that you and I need to understand about mercy. In fact, this is the most important thing for us, is that mercy means that we have gotten as low as we can go. Or if you want it in terms of a call to action for us this morning, is that we are to get as low as we possibly can. So if I were to ask you, what's the difference between grace and mercy? These are church words that we use all the time. You might have heard common definitions, right? Grace is getting what you don't deserve. That's one of my favorites. Grace gives, right? And it's not worked for, it's not earned. If it is, it ceases to be grace. This is why the idea that is so common all over the place, and especially here in the Bible Belt South, is if there is a God and if I get to go to heaven, it's because I'm a pretty good person. No, in that equation, if there's a God and if I get to go to heaven, it's because I'm a pretty good person, rips the guts out of grace. Because what you've said in your own way is, I deserve it. I've earned it. I've worked for it. I'm a good person. My good deeds have gotten me there. And everything in me, when I hear that, and it is so common, I have to bite my tongue to say, you have no clue what you're even talking about. You don't know yourself rightly, and you don't know that God rightly. Because if it could be earned, then it's not grace. And if it can be earned, what you've worked for is hell. That's what you're going to get. Grace is getting what you don't deserve. And then mercy is not getting what you do. All right, so you've probably heard, or maybe not, maybe this is the first time, but I think those are two simple but distinctive ways of defining the difference between grace and mercy. Grace, getting what you don't deserve. Mercy, not getting what you do deserve. I want to take you to a place in 2 John verse 3. And this is John writing to the church. Cool thing. So 2 John 1:3. John writes to the church, and he says this. This is his introduction in his letter. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father, Son, in truth and love. So grace, mercy, and peace. There is a distinction. Now, with these terms, there is some overlap, but I think the distinction is helpful for us this morning, especially when Jesus tells us, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. So I've just given you simple definitions, but I want to take us a little bit deeper concerning the difference between grace and mercy. And the reason is because Jesus is telling us the good life, the blessed life, the happy people are the merciful people. So again, I'm pulling, and I feel like every week I've been quoting. I mentioned to you last week Martin Lloyd-Jones in his commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. But Lloyd-Jones is very helpful here concerning mercy. And what he says is this, is that grace looks at us in our sin. Grace looks through a lens and sees sinners. But he says what mercy does is it looks through the lens and it doesn't just see sinners. It sees misery. It sees people in the consequences of their sin. All right, so if grace looks at us in our sin, what mercy does is it sees the consequences for that sin and how miserable we are. And this is why mercy is so important for us. Because if at any point you think that you can do something about your frame or your state, you are not going to cry out for mercy. You're not going to ask for it. Because what mercy does is mercy actually takes us to this place of helplessness. So when I say that if you want an action here is get as low as you can, is only people who are desperate and helpless and can do nothing for themselves are going to cry out for mercy. If at any point you think you can do something for you, you're not going to say mercy. It's when you've got nothing. That's why these build. It's when you are as low and as helpless and as miserable as you can be that you say mercy. Consider that for a second. See, you and I venture to say that outside of considering our souls before a living God, we think there's always a fighting chance. If you've ever been on any of these websites or read any of the books like the How to Survive a Shark Attack, How to Survive a Bear Attack, it's pretty comical reading. It's a position that none of us would want to be in, but we always think, man, a shark comes after me, a great white, I can fight that thing off. And to read about it, for me it's comical because everything about a shark, we'll take two examples, shark attack, bear attack. Everything about a shark attack, I'm telling you, I would be thrashing and swimming as fast as I could and I'd be a goner. I mean, because it's not what you're supposed to do, right? The sharks respond to the thrashing movement. They think, prey. Well, you're not supposed to. You're supposed to face it. All right, so, obviously, like you're in the water and a great white's coming at you, and you're going to be thinking through these things. You want to turn and you want to face the shark. You want to look, and I did do some reading on this week, so you can jot this down. This is good stuff. You want to turn and face the shark. You want to look at it eyeball to eyeball. You don't want to make any thrashing movements. If you punch at it, don't punch at its nose because you might miss and then your arm goes in its mouth and then you're down an arm. So punch at its gills because that's a sensitive area for this shark. So, identify the gills, punch at the gills. And then kind of like backpedal, backstroke, not thrashing in a calmed manner. Maintain eye contact. Now, one thing that I found actually on CNN about how to survive a shark attack that I found very helpful was that you want to stay big, like make yourself big, or not, make yourself very small. And the difference is whether or not the shark is in full-blown like attack mode or whether it's just kind of checking you out. So if it's just checking you out, make yourself small because you don't want to show yourself a threat for its food. If it's in full-blown attack mode, make yourself big. I thought, I'm going to do the exact opposite. I'm going to make myself small so that it can get me down in one swallow. Because I should have made myself, or I'm going to make myself big, and that thing was just like, he didn't even know I was there. And I'm screaming, and then, okay, I got you now. How are you supposed to discern that? Bear attacks, I'll give you this one too. Bear attack, and this is from the Art of Manliness, artofmanliness.com, because that's you really want to man up on the bear attack. So you need to discern whether or not it's a grizzly or a black bear. Seems pretty simple. If it's a grizzly bear, this is when you play dead. All right, hands on your neck, fetal position, pray to God that thing goes away. The first point on the bear attack for both of those was use your bear pepper spray. Oh, got to get that at Walmart next time. Note to self, if I survive, make sure I always have the bear pepper spray with me. If that doesn't work and the thing's still coming at you, grizzly bear, play dead and pray to God that it goes away. If it's not a grizzly, if it's a black bear, this is when you actually want to make loud noises and get big. And at the end of the thing, there was a disclaimer which I thought was really helpful. It said, don't try to find a bear to practice on. So here's the point, is that most of us always think that we have a fighting chance. Even for something as absurd as a shark attack or a bear attack. I can do this. I got this bear. I got this shark. Now, granted, survival mode will kick in, but even when we're grossly outmanned and the odds are not in our favor, we always think there's a way out. We always think that there's a way to win. We always think that we might have an opportunity for success. And mercy, catch this, mercy is for those whose measly attempts to fight would be crushed in a second. Mercy is for those who have no fight left in them. Mercy is for the powerless. Mercy is for the helpless. Mercy is for the weak. So Franz Stigler is up beside the plane. And now what he sees as he's looking in is he actually sees through a massive hole blown in the side, is he sees the wounded crew taking care of other wounded crew. You know, the B-17, the Flying Fortress, had a huge crew that it took simply to fly this thing and then to man all the guns and to drop the bombs. And several of the crew members had been shot up. Several others were unwounded, and they were taking care of each other. And he looks in, and he can see, because of the size of the hole in the side of this thing, he can see from where he's at on the side of the plane, crew members taking care of other crew members. He sees them tending to their wounded. And he remembers something that his commander had told him. See, a lot of the guys in the German fighting force, they were caught up in it. They didn't simply think that everybody outside of Germany were their enemies. But they also knew that they couldn't necessarily trust everybody that was simply in their own army, their own fighting force. There was a case a year before Franz Stigler, before this incident in 1943, where a German woman had been killed because she had made a joke. She was young, maybe 19, 20 years old, and she had made a joke. She was a German woman who made a joke about the SS. And so she was publicly killed because of a joke. And so Franz Stigler's commander had asked him, what do you do if you see a plane that's been shot up and is going down? And he didn't know how to answer the question. He was 26 years old. So he simply said, I haven't thought that far ahead. And his commander said to him, in essence, you're going to have to live with yourself after this war is over with. If I see you shoot at a plane that's going down or at an enemy who is parachuted out of his plane, and I hear that you have shot at somebody who's wounded and helpless, he said, I'll shoot you down myself. He said, the most important thing for you to remember is honor. Because you're going to have to live with yourself when the war is over with. And so as Stigler looks inside of the plane and he sees these men taking care of themselves, he remembers what his commander had told him. And so what he does is he shifts position. He goes over to the left to where Charles Brown is seated in the cockpit flying the plane. And he starts frantically making hand gestures to Charles Brown. He's pointing down, and then he's pointing ahead. And then he's mouthing something over and over. Now, from Charles Brown's vantage point, he has no idea what he's saying. And he's panicking, thinking this lunatic German pilot is simply playing with me. It's like the shark playing with the food in the water before he devours it. This guy's just having fun with me. But Franz Stigler over and over again keeps pointing down, and he keeps pointing ahead, and he keeps mouthing something. See, mercy is for the low. It's for the helpless. It's for the weak. It's for the pitiable. And mercy is a cry. You must cry for and receive mercy. So when Jesus tells us, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy, there's almost this feedback loop that you haven't caught all of the equation, because the merciful are those who've already received mercy. And they're full of mercy because they've received it. And the way that they've received it is they've cried for it. A girl that I went to college with for my undergrad, for my bachelor's, went to work for a Christian organization as a photographer. And she was overseas several years ago in a place that the people spoke French. It was the dialect, extremely impoverished, third world. And as she walked the streets in the town that she was in, she heard all the children on the streets crying out, "Merci, merci." And it means please. And she, every time she heard it, she thought, are they asking for mercy? They were asking for a handout. They were asking for food. They were asking for mercy. And they were just simply saying, please, over and merci, merci, merci. And in that, she heard mercy, mercy, mercy. The most prominent request of Jesus in the New Testament is mercy. It's the most prominent request of Jesus in the New Testament. And the kinds of people that ask for it, I'll give you a sampling. Matthew chapter 9, there are two blind men. Jesus, Son of God, have mercy. In Matthew chapter 15, there's a Canaanite woman whose daughter was possessed. And she cries out to Jesus, have mercy. Matthew chapter 17, a father who brings his son to Jesus cries out for mercy. Matthew chapter 20, again, two blind men come to Jesus and they cry out for mercy. In Luke chapter 18, one of my favorite, a tax collector before God at the temple bows his head and he says, mercy. Have mercy on me. It is a cry for help from the helpless. And when you consider the objects, right? The people that cry out for mercy are the desperate, the destitute, the helpless, the hopeless, the weak, the broken, the hurting. They're people that have gotten way past the point of thinking, I can survive, I can do this, I got this, I can take care of it. They've long gotten past that. But the kind of people that they cry out for mercy to, like my friend walking the streets, merci, 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 is you don't cry out for somebody for mercy if you don't think that they can help you. Mercy is always a cry between two parties, one that is completely helpless and the other who can help. In military terms, it's from a conquered enemy asking, don't kill me, because the other person has the clear advantage. There's always a strong and there's always a weak. There's always that with mercy in the middle. And so you and I cry out for mercy and we receive it. First, when we've gotten as low as we can, but two, when we've seen an object, when we've seen somebody that can help us. You don't cry out for mercy to anybody that's not in a place to give you help, to give you hope, to give you something that you don't have in yourself. So Charles Brown sees Franz Stigler now and he makes direct eye contact with him. He starts screaming for one of his men to get into the Top Gun, Not the tail gun, but the turret that sat on the top of the plane. This one. And of course he's screaming. Now Franz Stigler's in his German fighter beside Charles Brown. Charles starts screaming for somebody to get into the gun and shoot this guy down while we still have a chance. And as Stigler continues to point down and point ahead, he starts to see somebody mount here, and he starts to see the gun turn. And so with a salute, he leaves. He takes off. Never to be seen by those men again. At least not for almost 40 years. And so what Charles ends up doing, miraculously, is he was able to keep the plane flying. They get out of Germany into England, and they land. To everybody's amazement. The war goes on. He finishes up his service with the Air Force. He moves to Miami. He retires. And only his wife and his commander knew about the encounter with Franz Stigler. In fact, Charles Brown had been instructed not to tell anyone. And the reason is because they did not want to humanize the enemy. To learn about this German fighter pilot that did not shoot down this plane would have given a sense of mercy, grace, humanity to the enemy. And so the encounter was listed as classified. And the only person that Charles ever talked to about it was his wife. But it kept gnawing at him. It kept plaguing him. And he wondered, whatever happened to that pilot? And why did he do what he did? So in January 1990, now that was December 1943. In January 1990, Charles Brown from Miami took out an ad in a newsletter that went out to pilots, asking if anybody knew about a German fighter pilot who had let a B-17 over Germany go over the Atlantic. Franz Stigler, after the war, after he finished up, he had received the Knight's Medal for, it was the highest honor that German fighter pilots were given for the number of kills that they had during the war. After receiving that and finishing up his service in Germany, he feared for his own life because of this incident. He knew that if anybody from the ground had seen his numbers on the tail, had seen him escorting a B-17 bomber to the Atlantic over Germany, that it would mean his life. So in due time, he moved from Germany to Vancouver, Canada, where he was living with his wife. He had one daughter. Charles Brown had two daughters. And in 1990, he sees this ad requesting information. I don't know, I'm getting choked up about it. Requesting information. The one thing that Charles Brown had left out of the ad was where they departed. He wanted that to be basically the secret kind of key to let him know that this really was the person if anybody responded. And when Franz Stigler saw the ad, he yelled at his wife, "It's him! It's him! He made it!" He immediately sits down and he responds to the ad, letting Charles Brown know that he was alive. Charles Brown gets the letter and immediately calls Franz Stigler. And he says, "I'm the B-17 pilot that you let go." And Stigler said, "I never knew what was going to happen to you after I left and you went out across the ocean." And that was the thing. That was the bit of information that Charles Brown had left out of the ad. And he said, "It really is you." They made plans to meet up. You'll see a picture of what they look like in their adult life now. I think we have that for you. There they are. This is Charles Brown and Franz Stigler. Both men died within 6 months of each other in 2008. They had a reunion. They continued to stay in contact with each other, and they became best friends. In fact, in each other's obituary, it listed the other as a special brother. Stigler died at age 92. Charles Brown at age 87. So Charles had asked Franz, "What were you motioning to me?" He said, "I was telling you that we're still over Germany, and I was trying to get you to follow me to Sweden. And I was going to run escort with you all the way to Sweden. It was the closest place for you to get to and land safely. And I knew that if other German fighters saw me beside you, they would leave you alone, and I was going to take you all the way there." And he said, "When I saw the man get in the turret to shoot me down, I said, 'Good luck. You're in God's hands now.' And I saluted you and left." Both men were Christian. Stigler had prayed for the men of that plane. Charles had kept a pocket Bible with him whenever he flew, and he would pad it when he got into situations like that one. He said he felt like it would give him a direct line to God if he had padded his Bible before he prayed. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. And that's the last part of this for us this morning, is that we are to show pity. And I use that word intentionally because I think it does something in the connotation for us this morning that goes deeper than mercy. Now, mercy is for the helpless, mercy is for the broken, mercy is for the hopeless. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. And I think you can say, blessed are the pitiful, because they will be shown pity. See, that's not something that you and I would probably go to work tomorrow and say, "Hey, listen, I am pitiful." You're not going to say that. You know, we use the word pity as a derision. Poor pitiful person. Poor pitiful them. And it's not going to be the badge of honor for us, right? It's not going to be the thing that we gladly, willingly, wholeheartedly say, "Listen, I am pitiful." But I think that gets more to the heart of it. Because to pity somebody really is seeing them in their misery. It's seeing them for how miserable they are in this life, in the consequence of their sin. Now, there's a good account that I think brings this home for us, and I want to take us here and leave us here. And it comes from Luke chapter 10, and it's the story of the Good Samaritan. It might be a story that many of you are familiar with. If not, I want to read it to you, but I want to highlight 3 things about this story because it's always true wherever mercy is for all of us. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus tells this story to a man who is trying to justify himself. Now, catch that. Last week, and I would encourage you to go back and listen to that message if you haven't already. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. The word justify means to declare right. God's justification of sinners means that He has declared us right with Him, even though we're not. And He does that because of Jesus in His life, death, and His resurrection for sinners. He came to die for sinners. It's the sick who need a physician, not the well. And so there was a man who had questioned Jesus about the law and seeking to justify himself after Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God, heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." He wanted to justify himself. He wanted to be right. So he asked Jesus, "Well, who is my neighbor? If I'm to love God, heart, soul, mind, strength, and love my neighbor, who is my neighbor, Jesus?" And this is the story that Jesus tells in relationship to that. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him for dead. Verse 31, Luke chapter 10. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, the man beaten up and left for dead, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, and that was the priestly class. So a Levite when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, the significance there is Samaritans were despised people. They were half-breeds. They were hated by pure Jews. There was a very distinct ethnic distinction between Jews and Samaritans. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, he came to where this man was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Verse 33. Mercy always begins with empathy. Empathy. Now, it's not just like, man, I'd hate to be you. But it is an internal empathy, entering into other people's suffering. And you need to catch this. This is not like the good people in your life suffering. This is the people who are not like you. And mercy always begins with empathy. And so he has compassion. Verse 34, he goes to him. He binds up his wounds. He pours on oil and wine, and he sets him on his own animal, and he brings him to an inn to take care of him. And the next day he takes out 2 denarii, and he gives them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Mercy always begins with empathy, and it always moves toward an effort. It's not mercy if you're not doing anything about it. So when people cry out to Jesus for mercy, they're crying out to one who is stronger than them, who would act in love for them. And when we receive mercy and then turn around and give mercy, mercy is not just a feeling inside of you, it is a movement toward another who cannot help themselves. It begins in empathy and it moves in effort. It has to. It's not mercy if it doesn't. Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And he said, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus says, you go, and you do likewise. Empathy, effort, even for our enemies. Even for those that there is enmity between us. Those are the 3 components of mercy. Consider that before you post on social media. Consider that before you look down your nose at the terrible sinners around you. Consider that before you respond to the person who's come after you. Consider that when you drive by the person begging for money on the corner. Consider that when you are considering what to say to the person that has sinned against you. Consider that when you cry out to God. You show me mercy, dear Lord. Would you show me mercy? It's easy, it could be easy for us in Matthew chapter 5, verse 7 to think that there is some sort of works righteousness going on here. So if I want to get mercy from God, I got to show mercy to others. But it's the exact opposite of that. It's the exact opposite. See, Jesus is laying out for us characteristics of what a Christian is. He's not telling us how to be Christian. He's telling us this is what a Christian is. A Christian is somebody that's got nothing, poor in spirit. A Christian is somebody who grieves over their own sin, mourns. A Christian is somebody who is bowed low before God and others. They're not trying to prove themselves. A Christian is somebody who is hungering and thirsting for a rightness that can't be found in them. They've already acknowledged, I got nothing. So that yearning to be right has to be outside of me. They're longing for Christ. And a Christian has received mercy. They've cried out for it and they've received it. So when they encounter a world in need of it, they're quick to give it because they've got it. Let's pray. Oh Lord, we're going to come to the table this morning to receive a grace. As we take bread and we take juice, representing your body broken and your blood spilled, this is a place where we have received grace and mercy. Lord, we are a pitiable people. And I don't say that to leave us there, because you have moved toward us. Beaten up, stripped, left for dead. And you did not pass by. You stopped. Lord, you didn't just give an animal, and you didn't give denarii, you gave your life. So that this miserable, pitiable, helpless estate that we find ourselves in would not end there. But we would be clothed, we would be healed, we would be saved. And as we come to the table this morning, Father, I pray that we would have a deep sense of the mercy that we've received. In your wrath, O Lord, remember mercy. As Hosea called out, that we would remember the mercy, and we would take and eat and drink the mercy that we receive because of you, Jesus. And it's in your name that we pray. Amen.